Good afternoon and welcome to today's live webinar on driving innovation through inclusiveness. I'm Helen Wollaston, the Chief Executive of WISE. I was really pleased to chair this session when Tracey asked me to do so, because the topic's never been more important. Inclusion and innovation and the links between them never been more important, particularly because of COVID-19, which has exposed inequalities and the serious impact on people's lives, quite literally. And also, in recent weeks, the death of George Floyd has prompted a resurgence of the Black Lives Matter campaign and the frustration that Black people and those who support them in the lack of action and real call for action to address systemic inequalities facing Black people. And so the topic of inclusion is, as I say, never more important than it is because of those two huge issues in the external world. Now, inclusion is a massive topic, really big topic. COVID-19 and Black Lives Matter have thrown up huge questions. And sometimes it can be difficult to know where to start. We're not going to cover everything today, but today's a start. We're going to start with the business case. And we've got two specific objectives, really, in doing that. One is to give you arguments and evidence to make the business case for taking action on inclusion within your own organisation. And the second thing is to give you some pointers on what actions you can take that will make a difference. So that's our objective for the seminar today, the webinar today. And it's the first of a series. And the next one will be also all around inclusion. And the next one will be at the end of July. And I structurally will be in touch with everybody who's registered for this one to give you details of the next webinar in the series. So look out for that. And the speakers, you'll hear, I'll start from WISE talking about strategies to attract women into engineering. And then we'll hear also from a contractor, from an engineering consultancy, and from a client. So different perspectives, presentations for about 10 minutes from each of us, and then we'll move into the questions and answers. So if I start, I'll begin now, introduce myself very briefly. I've spent about 20 years at least working on diversity and inclusion. First of all, as Director of Campaigns at the Equal Opportunities Commission, and then through my own consultancy doing projects around diversity and inclusion across different aspects of diversity. And then the last 8 years as Chief Executive of WISE. And inclusion is important to me because it makes the world a better place, put simply, and that's why I do what I do. So moving on to explain what WISE does, we're a membership organisation, but unlike iStructure, our members are organisations rather than individuals, and we provide organisations who share a commitment to gender balance in science, technology and engineering. We share resources and evidence and tools to help make progress. And we've got around 180 organisational members across big companies. Some of those speaking today are members, universities and research bodies and institutional members. I'm hoping iStructure will join us along with other professional engineering institutions who are already members. And our focus is on gender balance, and gender balance as a business issue, not as a women's issue. And so our members are the employers of those women in STEM, the employers and the educators and the professional bodies supporting women in STEM. And we take an inclusive approach. It's not about women at the expense of men, and it's not about gender being more important than race or disability or sexual orientation. We believe very much that inclusion is better for everybody, because when we bring our whole selves to work, we're happier and we perform better than if we're hiding part of ourselves, trying to fit into a majority culture. So that's really the approach WISE takes. And our goal for the UK is that the science, technology, engineering, mathematical workforce in the UK would be 30% of those occupations will be occupied by women by 2030. And we set that goal because there's research that shows 30% of any group starts to influence culture change. And there's a link there to that research originally from Harvard University, but it's been repeated many times in different contexts. It's not just about women, it would be the same for black people or any minority group, for men in a group of women indeed. And it currently, the UK STEM workforce WISE monitors the stats every year from the government statistics, and as of the end of 2019 we were at 24%. So it is a stretch, but it's an achievable target that by 2030 we'd have increased that to 30%. So that's our strategy as a campaign. Moving on to the topic of this webinar on the business case, one of the things WISE does as a resource for those wanting to make the case for gender balance in STEM is collate evidence on the business case, and that's the front page of a report that summarises that research, which is available on the WISE website. And we've grouped the research into the evidence, I should say, into those 5 headings. Gives you a better choice of skilled workers, a better platform for innovation, improves productivity, improves customer experience because you've got a broader range of experiences on the team, better able to make your services relevant to customers from different backgrounds, and it improves financial performance. And that graph on the right-hand side is from Bloomberg. You probably can't see the font there, but it shows that those companies with women in senior jobs have improved financial performance. And there's other evidence on that. We'll hear some more later in some of the other presentations. And the quote there, about 10% increase in female representation in women in innovation in STEM would generate 3 billion more for UK businesses. That came from research we published last year, sponsored by Amazon, on women in innovation in STEM. And I'll come back to that in a later slide. And the next slide I've got on the business case is from, Network Rail is an example of a business case for a company in the UK. A couple of years ago, Mark Kahn, who was the then chief executive, presenting why getting more, this was a quote from him, getting more women into the railway will improve the railway, improve the performance of the railway. And he was able to say that because what Network Rail did was compare the results of their internal employee survey for the operational teams. That's the routes, the part of the business which manages the routes across the UK for Network Rail. So they're the most operational part of the business. And what they found, they correlated those results by the percentage of women in the operational teams. And those with 20% or more women had higher, there was a correlation between the employee engagement results. So they could see that in teams that had 20% or more women, the team was more engaged overall, the men and the women, the whole team. The sickness rates were lower, the teams were more productive, and they were more collaborative. So Mark Kahn was able to say, having more women in your team makes for better business. So it was a good example of a business case for that particular company. Linking to the gender pay gap, we did some research for the Royal Academy of Engineering, published in January of this year, on closing the gender pay gap for engineers specifically. And what we found was a compelling case for having a credible action plan. It's not about the pay gap itself, but what your organisations are doing about it. And those that had published their pay gap and an action plan on what they were doing about it were better able to attract women, better able to inspire and motivate their own workforce, the trust of their employees in what the company was saying about diversity and inclusion was better when there was something credible being said about what they were doing to address the gender pay gap. And for those whose business came from the public sector, they helped them win business. So another angle on the business case. And then coming back to the Amazon research, there we are. So that is a chart from the research I mentioned before, about which looked at barriers and enablers for women who were working in STEM innovation roles. So they had innovation in their job title, or they'd filed patents, they're working in research and development roles in STEM companies or universities or research institutions. And what the point here on the enablers that are shown in this chart from the report was that the personal qualities come above the organisational factors. So the point is that women are relying on their own drive and resilience and determination to get to where they are. And so there's an opportunity, if you just imagine, well, if organisations did a bit more, then there's an opportunity to get more women working, driving innovation in your businesses. So I'd see that as an opportunity for organisations to take more action that would enable more women to work in innovation. So moving on now to what you can do about it, I'm going to share a framework that we use with our members, which is the 10 steps, which is about creating an inclusive culture. So this is designed to support the attraction, progression and retention of women, particularly in a STEM organisation, STEM environment. And the point is that there isn't one magic bullet. It's not just about flexible working or just about opportunities for progression. All of these things, it's a systematic approach that makes the difference, led from the top, like we had a good example there with the quote from Mark Kahn at Network Rail, and Network Rail being one of the signatory companies. And this framework does make a difference. We've been working, we've had companies now who've been using it for 3 to 4 years, and on average, those companies have been using it for 3 to 4 years show a 10% increase in women working in the organisation. And what we do each year is benchmark progress for the whole cohort. And this chart shows the results for 2019 against each of the 10 steps, ranking them by those where at the top where people felt they were making the most progress, and those in red where they're making the least progress. And what's interesting is the one right at the bottom, increased transparency of opportunities for progression. Because when we did the gender pay gap, closing the gender pay gap for engineers research last year for the Royal Academy of Engineering, we found that what made the biggest difference to the gender pay gap was transparency in pay and progression policies. In fact, those companies which had transparent pay and progression had a gender pay gap for engineers 75% smaller. So there's clearly more to be done in terms of removing some of the barriers to inclusion for women in engineering at least, which is why I thought that's interesting to share those results. And then moving on to coming back to COVID-19, some of you will be aware, you've seen there's increasing evidence of the risk to women because of the impact of COVID-19. And that's for a few reasons. One is that women are more likely to be taking on more of the caring roles, whether it be for children, homeschooling, or caring for other members of the family or friends. And that has an impact on their ability to manage their work lives as well. That may resonate with some of you listening. And also, there are more women in insecure employment on 0 hours contracts, etc., whose jobs may be at risk in either now or predicted recession. And we've seen some organisations feeling that maybe diversity and inclusion, they're putting it on the back burner because it's not as urgent as some of the issues they need to address right now because of COVID-19, because of lockdown and so on. And so while being concerned about that and hearing from our members who were also concerned about that, we brought together a group of organisations, 20 STEM organisations, who've signed a joint statement, which is on the WISE website, committing to take an action in these 5 areas. One was about telling positive stories to demonstrate the contribution women in science and technology and engineering are making. Secondly, because we don't want to reverse the progress that we've made. We want to make sure that women who may be on furlough or about to take up a role at the early stage of their career, the beginning of their career, or maybe at risk of redundancy or indeed made redundant, that we keep those women connected to science, technology and engineering through the various networks. And thirdly, that we take the opportunity to make sure there is training available, and we share the free training that's available on IT skills or other skills that would help those women stay in or get into jobs in STEM skill shortage areas, and also thinking about children, the STEM resources that are available to inspire girls and other underrepresented groups of the opportunities that if they choose science, technology, engineering, maths as subjects whilst they're at school. So we've shared resources on that. The fourth area was to monitor the gender impact of decisions being made about redundancy, for example, or furloughing now to make sure that we don't inadvertently disadvantage women or indeed any other group. And the fifth area is to think about the benefits from more working from home. I know it's not universally positive, but it has removed barriers in some industries which have prevented women and people from other groups being able to take up opportunities. So let's learn from the positive of what's happening now and share that. And under each of those 5 headings, we've created a portal page on the website, sharing resources, not just from ourselves, but from the other organisations. So that's something for you to look at, and we're keeping that live. We've got evidence there as well from other organisations about the impact on women. And on the sharing positive stories, I just wanted to share this, which is an online campaign WISE launched last month, and it's something you can all do, which is submit a selfie with a picture of why you or your colleagues are one of a million. And Chrisma, who's going to speak later from Transport for London, that's a picture of her that she shared on social media as part of that campaign. And we're delighted because there's nearly 1,500 people have already shared photos, and they're updated live on the WISE site. So it's a great positive way of raising the profile, raising awareness of the variety, the breadth and depth of contributions women are making, not just during COVID-19, but making the difference because they're involved in a STEM occupation. So that's something positive you can all do. And then for those of you who aren't already familiar with WISE, I've mentioned this just summarises what the services we offer to organisations who want to improve the gender balance in STEM in their organisations. And I've mentioned 10 steps. The other main flagship resource we've got is called My Skills, My Life, which is a resource to help you inspire girls to choose STEM. It's aimed at teenage girls. So you can find more information about that on the WISE website. And finally, I've got the contact details here for myself, and you can follow us on social media there, and there's the website address. So that's a quick whiz through the gender aspects. And I'm going to now introduce Tracey Collins from Kier, and she's going to give the next presentation. So I'm going to put myself on mute and hand over to Tracey. Thank you very much, Tracey.
Brilliant. Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? I'm going to sort of plough on assuming that you can, so that's all good. So yes, good afternoon and welcome, and it's great to be here to present to you today. My name's Tracey Collins. I'm the Talent Development and Inclusion Manager for Kier Highways. And I'm just going to spend a bit of time telling you today a little bit about the journey we've been on. So from a contractor's sort of point of view, the journey we've been on from ED&I point of view, and really why we've discovered and you know that business case for ED&I is absolutely vital to making sure that you're successful in the ED&I world, really. So there's quite a lot of slides here. So what I plan to do today, because I don't want to go over my 10-minute slot, is to sort of take you through quite quickly on some of the slides. But if you've got any questions, please do feel free to post them. And obviously you'll get a copy of these so you can see some of the detail later. So I guess a little bit like a lot of companies, we've been in the ED&I world and been pushing ED&I for a long time within Kier. But what we found probably about 3 years ago, we'd sort of really discovered that we weren't really sure why we were doing things. We were doing loads of initiatives in the ED&I space, but it was almost a little bit still tick boxy. So, you know, it was like we felt we were doing it because we should, our clients wanted us to, but it was quite hard work to take the business on that journey with us because it wasn't really linked to the business itself. It was more of a CSR, we should do it. And I think you know, if anyone's in that space at the minute, it feels difficult. Then you're always sort of persuading people that this is a good thing to do, rather than it being really driven from the top. So about sort of 3 years ago, we sort of had a bit of a refresh of our ED&I journey. And the first thing we really did is go back to the sort of drawing board and think about why we're doing this. And really try and underpin to the business focus for doing equality, diversity and inclusion. So, you know, there's lots of great reports out there. There's lots of great stats. Obviously, we heard some ones from WISE a minute ago. But actually, what we started was engaging with our leadership team to really discover why this was important. And I won't go through all the stats there, but it really adds up around productivity, around engagement, around recruitment, you know, around loads of those areas which, you know, we're not going to be successful as a business if we don't embed a lot of these principles, you know, not just because they're the right thing to do, but actually it's a core way of how we operate. And we also looked at what actually is going to happen if we don't do it. So, you know, on the flip side, you know, I think the business state case stacks up, but it was really important for us to think about what's the other side, you know, what if we don't do it? And some statistics within the transportation industry from the CHT, that 96% of companies in the industry that we're operating in are going to suffer skills shortages if we continue to you know, to recruit from the same pools of talent. We're going to struggle. So it's really important that we look at what we're doing, and, you know, and traditionally in industry, as Wise spoke about, where females are not hugely represented. You know, we've got there, you know, 39% of purchasing decisions are made in the UK made by women. The people that are awarding us contracts, we've got to connect with them, and we need to connect with our customers. So we did some work with our leadership team to really identify why are we doing this? And what was important for us is that where we weren't is data driven for our ED&I journey. So I think it's crucial for anybody that's sort of looking at how they improve their ED&I journey within the company. One of the things for us was about data. It was about understanding where we were then, understanding where we wanted to be and what our aspirations were, and then measuring our progress. I mean, we've done loads of ED&I initiatives, but we actually didn't know which ones were successful because we weren't really measuring where we were on the journey. So back in 2017 or 16-17 when we started, we benchmarked ourselves and we set ourselves some goals to achieve by 2020, looking at actually what's really important for us. And, you know, what is the data telling us where we should concentrate? Because sometimes where we were concentrating was where we felt we should. And actually, when we looked at it, there were some areas that we didn't really realise we were not so good at, but we weren't. So I think as part of that business case, it's starting with the data and using that to drive your action plan. So from there, we developed our strategy. We set ourselves a strategy from 2018 to 2020, and we're currently reviewing that. And as Helen said earlier, one of the things that we wanted to really focus on for ED&I was not around all about protective characteristics, or, you know, obviously that's important, but actually it's more around inclusion. We wanted a workplace where people can bring their whole selves to work, where, you know, people could be themselves and, you know, and actually feel at home, comfortable. You know, they could bring things to work if they wanted to, but they didn't have to. So it was just about people being able to be themselves. And we set ourselves some strategic aims. And what was really important is this came from our business plan. So this wasn't about us sitting in a group of, you know, ED&I champions, HR professionals. We sat with our executive team and we said, what is our business objectives and how can ED&I help us achieve them? And then from there, we set ourselves 8 strategic aims. And I won't go through them all today, but they were the sort of real core principles that we developed our strategy on. And as I say, what was really important is that it wasn't us deciding on them. This was linked about how we would achieve our business plan. And off the back of that, so we got this great strategy, but often with strategies, they're lovely as a document, they're shiny, you know, it was great, but it didn't really tell us the how. How are we going to do these things? So off the back of that, we developed an action plan. And the action plan was where we used our data. So that was about saying, where we are now, what do we want to achieve, and where do we want to get to? And we focused our action plan around two key areas: our employees, so about internally, but it's also vital for us that we consider how our actions affect our communities, our customers, and also our supply chain partners. So it wasn't just about internally for us, it was about how do we work in the communities that we work in as well. And as I said before, it was really important for us that it was led from the top. So we got engagement and we got sponsorship from our leadership team. But what we also wanted was, because it's again all good and well having a fluffy strategy and a steering group, but what was key for us was we set up an ED&I action group, and that had representatives from all of our key businesses. So we've got 65 ED&I champions through Kier Highways, and there's one in every single area of our business, and they make it happen on the ground. So for them, it's about taking what we set corporately and making it happen on the ground. And I just mentioned there's a couple of things that really surprised us when we looked at our data. And the first thing was back in 2016 when we started looking at our data, or 2017, one thing that surprised us was 11.6% of our workforce preferred not to say around disability, which was more than any other area. So they'd tell us their sexual orientation, their religion, their ethnicity, but they wouldn't tell us if they were disabled. And before we started looking at our data, we would never have known we had an issue in this area. So that really helped us to go on a plan. We've now become a disability confident leader. And over the last 3 years, we've gone from 11.6 prefer not to say in disability to 2.3%. And we've gone from only 3% of our population declaring a disability to now 10% of our population declare a disability. And for us, that was, that's not about externally, but that was about making our own people feel that they could be themselves. And then we also looked about how do we bring in more people and how are we more inclusive. So that was one of the areas we identified. And one of the other areas we identified was around our recruitment practices. So what we found was, and coming back to the conversations around more females within the industry, before we looked at our data, we just assumed that females didn't apply for roles within our industry because it wasn't attractive. And our efforts had gone into how we attract more, so about recruiting, engaging with organisations that help work with women. And don't get me wrong, there is still definitely a place for that. But when we looked at our data, we found that actually there was a really big drop-off between the females that were offered an interview. So we had 22% of our total people offered interview were female, but only 12% got offered a job. So actually we found there that although we need to do more to attract, we lost, almost 10% between interview and offered a role. So we went on a massive program of upskilling our line managers in inclusive recruitment. And within the year, we went from, we went up also about applications. So we now have almost 30% applications from females. But we actually, now find that there is a much smaller drop-off between those offered interviews and offered a role. And we're now offering from 12% a year ago, 28% of our offers are now female, which again, if we hadn't have started with the data, we wouldn't have gone on that journey to be able to discover that. I'm aware I guess we're sort of coming to the end of that 10 minutes. So, it has been a journey for us and we're still on that journey. So we've sort of got some accreditations that we've used to support our journey. And we're making really good progress about where we strive to be for 2020. But we also realise that, as again, Helen mentioned earlier, COVID-19 has thrown up a whole raft of new challenges. And we're a big focus now about how we utilise the lessons that we've learned through COVID-19, certainly around agile and flexible working, and how we really capitalise on those lessons that we've learned and grow on those lessons that we've learned, but also undertake some of the challenges that we now face for groups that may be feeling more excluded in the current circumstances, certainly people with caring responsibilities, people with children at home, people that may be home working might not work for them for a number of reasons, or people that actually, there's people with certain, backgrounds, that actually have found that working from home really works for them. So, how do we really capture that neurodiverse workforce and understand our people to see which environment works best for them and capitalise on that going forward? So it's been a real journey for us, and we're continuing, but hopefully you can see there, I guess, it really started to progress for us when we went back to the business case. I think we were, 3 or 4 years ago, we felt we were really good in this space, but actually, could we measure it? Could we justify it? And was it focused on us improving as a business? And I think we'd say no to all of them. So, I guess, it's really for us, it's moved forward since we really focused on the business case.
If we move, thank you very much, Tracey. What we're going to do is go straight on to Tiffany to share the perspective from Atkins.
Right. Hi, everyone. Apologies for that. My name's Tiffany, and I'm a structural engineer. I lead the building structures practice for the South East at Atkins. And when we prepared for this session, Helen asked us why we personally care about diversity and inclusion. And I think that the diversity is a given. I mean, the idea that boards or leadership teams or governments reflect the society they represent or serve, I mean, this is very intuitive for people. And the bit that I care about is the I, the inclusion. I think that you can't make it so difficult for people that once that they get there, once that they join an organisation or begin a role, that it's so difficult that they want to leave. I remember many years ago when I was working in Shanghai, and we picked up a new construction management contract for a manufacturing project in the outskirts of the city, which required 24-hour monitoring. And the project director immediately, first week of the job, put our female graduate on night shift for the week. I remember raising this with him, as a duty of care issue. Did he actually think it was a good idea to put a 21-year-old girl out in the middle of nowhere with no phone reception, supervising 200 men at 3 o'clock in the morning on her own? She was too frightened to raise this because, she was concerned that she would lose her job. And it would never have occurred to this 50-year-old man, project director, that this would even be an issue. And ironically, that supports the case for diversity in decision-making, that diverse groups help us to cover our blind spots. So I think that people have sort of discussed this already, that having a diverse workforce, it's more than just the right thing to do, that actually people look to the statistical evidence. And over probably the last 10 to 15 years, there's been an enormous amount of studies done. And what do the numbers say? So the studies are in support, that diverse companies do out-innovate and outperform. If we look on the left here, you can see this is a 2013 Harvard study which focused on growth and new market capture. But probably the most comprehensive data is coming from management consultants McKinsey. So they've been looking at this issue for more than a decade. And their 2017 study looked at financial returns and executive representation. And you can see from the graphic in the center there that those with highest representations of women on board and executive committees saw substantially better performance reflected in return on equity and EBIT margins. And it's important to remember that this is a correlation and not necessarily a causal relationship, but it is universally accepted that it's statistically significant. And for a moment, I'm just going to flip forward to the next slide, because not only is it statistically significant, it's also consistent with time. The business case for inclusion, it's stronger than ever. And as you see sort of moving through the years of the McKinsey studies, the percentages of outperformance are only rising. And that's true for both gender diversity and also ethnic diversity as well. And conversely, McKinsey consider that the penalties are getting steeper for those lacking in diversity. So the gap is widening. So the McKinsey studies, they focus really heavily on participation in boards and executive level committees. But if we look at the third piece graphic here, the Morgan Stanley study, they chose to expand out. So they similarly looked at financial performance, but rather than purely focusing on numbers on boards, they expanded it out across 5 dimensions, and they looked at things like percentage of women across in the company totally, not just at senior levels, and the existence of policies supporting D&I initiatives. But they had a whole range of features beyond just participation at senior level. If we think about engagement, so diversity, I think Helen has already mentioned, that it increases satisfaction and it fosters positive attitudes and behaviours. And that really is key for discretionary effort and performance. But really important to note is that, and I think Helen also mentioned some figures around this as well, that satisfaction doesn't actually kick in until representation of minority groups exceeds 15% of the workforce. So it's suggested then that where diversity is a token effort, or perhaps in recruitment, the psychological outcomes are actually poor. You actually need sufficient numbers to boost confidence and self-esteem, and you need a supportive culture, and this is considered more important than just the presence of a policy, even that's a necessary foundation. So, fundamentally, we've talked about, the idea that, that discretionary effort and engagement, that facilitates high performance. But fundamentally, business decisions have a direct impact on performance. So in 2010, a Harvard study found that there's a 95% correlation between decision effectiveness and financial results. So better decision making confers competitive advantage. And when we start to unpick this good decision making, if we think about the age-old idea that two heads are better than one, and also thinking about this and leading into the sort of collective intelligent concept, that through collective intelligence, we're leveraging a wider knowledge and experience base to make decisions. So by having different perspectives in our decision making, it allows us to cover our blind spots. Now, if we look at this 2017 study and going back to that two heads are better than one concept, simply moving to a group decision improved effectiveness of decision making by 58%. You can see by moving from a single decision maker to a group, all male, there's 58%. And as we start to overlay diversity along multiple dimensions, the effectiveness further strengthens. So you can see that by incorporating gender diversity, it jumped up to 73%, and once that you overlay age and geographic diversity within a group, you're up to an 87% improvement in effectiveness of decision making. And just reminding then that we said previously that there's a 95% correlation between effective decisions and financial results. So a big sort of concept behind this study was thinking about unconscious bias and how that affects decision making. And by definition, unconscious bias, we're largely unaware of it happening. So the idea that they're pushing is that, while we can train our managers to be more aware of bias, it is a really difficult thing to overcome. And instead of, forcing managers to struggle to play devil's advocate in their own head, inside their own head as they're going through the decision-making process, by creating diverse groups, this naturally happens, and it happens out loud through constructive challenge. So the next sort of point that we come to is it's not enough to simply construct a diverse group. You need a culture whereby individuals feel confident and are able to express opposing views to actually get the benefit. And culture is something that develops over time, and it makes the impact. And this, because it takes time then to sort of shift a culture, this makes the impact of leaders so important, particularly in the role of chair in meetings. So you need to have a strong chair, a strong leader, but can encourage those who are quieter or lack confidence to participate fully. And this culture is so important because if you expect minorities to simply fit in, you lose all the benefits of a diverse team. So it's really easy to see the benefits of diversity when you're thinking about brainstorming or developing and assessing options. And you can see how this adds richness to discussion, making sure that all options are considered and that you haven't missed fundamental aspects. But this is only the first part of decision making. But ultimately, then you need to converge on a decision and find a way to progress. And this is also where strong leadership is so important. So you may be aware of the fluency heuristic, which is whereby that things that are easy, we have a natural thought that then that makes them better or truer or more beautiful. So we like things to be smooth and easy. And robust discussions that seem disruptive, seem counterintuitive to this. So when we're having a robust discussion, interrogating, it feels like things are not going well. It feels really hard work, and it feels like that, that it's not actually working or not the right thing to do. But actually, this is the process of things going well. Interrogating and really analysing, different options, it means you truly do get a better decision. So it's really is, much the same with exercise, that there's this matter of no pain, no gain. And again, this is where it's really important that you have strong leaders who, have faith and enable the process to be seen through to conclusion, to actually persevere to get that good decision. So Helen touched on this briefly in the start, and I just really wanted to take the opportunity to interrogate this in a little bit more detail, the timeliness of a session like this in the current environment. So COVID-19, is an epidemic, but the London School of Economics, they've always made clear that all epidemics have a gendered effect. So if we think about previous epidemics like Ebola, this has led to dramatic increases in things like maternal mortality, but policymakers were not aware of this and no one really talked about it. So if we think about in the COVID-19 environment, the impact on women, people actually are starting to talk about this. Economic institutes are looking at it, and we're starting to see articles filter through into the press. So in the UK, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, they released a publication identifying the really immense pressure on parents. So the impact of schooling and childcare closures has created an additional 6 hours a day of caring responsibilities, and seen that often women, particularly, are doing two activities simultaneously because fundamentally small children require constant attention. So it's really important to people are starting to scrutinise the way that couples divide paid work and household responsibilities. I suppose the first thing to note is that during this period, fathers have nearly doubled the amount of time they've spent on childcare. But we need to view this in context. So mothers in paid employment, they previously used to work 73% of the hours that fathers worked. And during COVID-19, this has dropped down to 68%. Mothers are interrupted during working hours 50% more. And we've talked about sort of the split within couples, but we haven't even mentioned single parents and the impact on those. And I don't know the statistics for the UK, but in the US, 75% of single parents are mothers. So under pressure, mothers are more likely to step back from paid work, either voluntary or through job loss. And the study from the Institute for Fiscal Studies showed that women are 1.5 times more likely to either have lost their job or quit, and are also more likely to have been furloughed in this period. And when we think about the long-term implications and the hit to earnings prospects, women losing jobs in this market will struggle to find new ones. And there's real concern about being penalised in pay and promotion decisions where there are questions over effort and availability. So not only are women losing jobs at higher rates, but they were also earning less money to begin with. And ironically, this coincides with the government decision this year to remove the mandatory requirements to publish gender pay gap statistics this year. So when we talk about is D&I a luxury for businesses at the moment, this is a really crucial question, and thinking about how that we approach equality during this crisis and the role it will play in the future staff retention and business success of the future. So an ADP study, it showed that the tolerance of gender pay gap is really wearing thin. So 68% of their survey said that they'd consider looking for another job if they found an unfair gap existed at their company. But importantly as well, we've talked sort of about in the decision-making process that diverse and inclusive companies make better, bolder decisions, which is a really critical capability in a crisis. If we think about radical innovation, anticipating shifts in demand, phrases which are associated with diverse teams, whether or not, you immediately can see, as opposed to a necessity, this is a necessity as opposed to a luxury. And that there's competitive advantage to diverse teams, which support survival in this environment.
Thank you very much, Tiffany. I think it'd be great, Chrisma, if we could just jump straight into your introduction and then move forward into our piece.
Sure, great. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Chrisma Jain. I'm a chartered mechanical engineer, and I've worked in the railway industry for over 15 years. I'm currently a senior project manager working for Transport for London. Diversity and inclusion is really important to me because I truly believe that the products and the projects that we deliver are built and delivered better when it's done by an inclusive workforce. We've heard from the presenters today the business case and the stats that back this up. So I do feel that diversity and inclusion is important to TfL, and I'm really happy to be working part of an inclusive organisation.
That's great. Thanks, Chrisma. So I thought maybe if we could just start, it would be interesting to hear that as a major client, what is it that TfL in particular is looking for in its supply chain when it comes to D&I, and why is it important for you that your supply partners reflect your own principles when it comes to this subject?
Yeah, of course. So looking at London has a really diverse population, and that's one of the reasons why I love living in London. I'm Indian, I'm part of a mixed race marriage, and people all over the world live in London. And as TfL, we are looking to recruit a workforce that is fully representative of the diverse population in London. And then in turn, we want to reflect London's diversity across the supply chain. On the right-hand side of the slide, you should be able to see the bar chart. And the bar chart, the blue bars basically show the percentage population of the characteristic in London. So the blue bars, you can see there's gender, ethnicity and disability. So the blue bar, the first bar that you can see, it's 46% of women that live in London. In contrast to that, so the mint green bars, they are the percentage population of London Underground staff. And as you can see, there is still some work to do in the gender and the disability category. But as I said earlier, it's our aspiration as an organisation to have a workforce that reflects and represents its passengers and its customers.
That's fantastic, and that's it's important, therefore, that your supply chain also help you on that journey, so it becomes a collective commitment. Exactly. And I recall when I was with TfL, Chrisma, that a staff group network subcommittee, Females in Transport Engineering, was established to give a visible platform and a voice to the many staff within TfL who are concerned with the promotion of women across TfL. Why was it important for you to create that subgroup, and how is it, along with the many other TfL staff group networks concerned with a diverse and inclusive working environment, how has it made a difference to your members and to the business?
So absolutely, FIGHT is Females in Transport Engineering, and it is a subset of the Women's Staff Network Group. And basically, the staff network groups are essentially groups that assist in shaping the diversity and inclusion agenda for Transport for London. These groups allow a safe environment to challenge the status quo. It allows us to identify workplace issues and generally improve working life. For me specifically, so I'm the chair of FIGHT, and FIGHT was formed because it supported a group of women working within fairly male-dominated teams. And I'm sure you're aware of the stats that 12% of females are within the engineering industry, and therefore that's one of the reasons why this group was created. As you can see on the slide, as part of FIGHT, we've kind of organised ourselves in 4 pillars, and they are network, share knowledge, challenge and champion, and outreach. So we felt that it was really important to provide a forum for which women engineers can connect and network and sponsor each other. So that's the network pillar. Moving on to sharing knowledge, we wanted to provide a platform to share the engineering expertise and career advice to enable females to progress in their careers. TfL is a very big place and there's lots of projects. So enabling that cross-functionality and sharing that knowledge, I felt was really important. Moving to the third pillar, challenge and champion. We want to be able to hold the organisation to account and tackle inequality. And more recently, we're looking to champion our female talent, and that is through awards both internally and externally to show all the female role models that we have within Transport for London. And finally, the outreach pillar is our commitment to kind of improving diversity within engineering outside of Transport for London. I myself am part of the Inspiring the Leadership programme, STEM Ambassador programme, where I've been in schools to show children that engineers come in all different shapes and sizes. So that has been really useful for me.
And I think Tracey touched on this earlier, but how important has it been to have that sort of senior level sponsorship of the group to widen its reach and promote its aims?
Oh, it's been hugely important. We've got an exco who is sponsoring our group, and it just kind of helps in terms of if you've got a blocker and you need that extra support, or you need that communication to make sure your message is travelling a little bit wider, it has been really useful.
Great, and just sort of moving to the essence of this particular talk here is how have you seen the diversity of the workforce and the collaborative teams actually bring innovation and add value to TfL?
So I thought I'd take a little bit of time to tell you a little bit about me and what I do and how I've seen innovation improve through inclusivity in my surroundings. So as I said earlier, I'm a senior project manager, and essentially I'm responsible for renewing the track and drainage infrastructure across the London Underground network. Last year, London Underground signed a £220 million rail contract to deliver those track renewals. So for me, through the collaboration between the two rich and diverse organisations, and you can see a picture on the right-hand side of the slide, we've very much focused the joint organisation on collaboration. And I believe we've created a safe space to allow that organisation, that team, to bring their ideas to the table. And through this, it's allowed us to innovate as a team. On a contractual note, innovation is a KPI, but I feel like we've got innovation right throughout the organisation. So from contractually, from senior management, from middle management, and through the team as a whole. I also feel, compared to other rail teams, and we've had feedback from BASB, the other projects, that we are one of the more diverse teams. So I think that's been really useful, and it's shown within us bouncing ideas off of each other.
And just conscious of allowing enough time to ask some questions, I thought maybe, Chrisma, it would help if you could just expand a little bit on how inclusion is very much on the Mayor's transport agenda at the moment, and how that's influenced Innovation TfL's approach wider to sort of inclusive and accessible transport modes, so things like the Step-Free Access programme and use of immersive tools to help train your staff to identify and respond to their customers' needs.
So absolutely, inclusion is very much on the agenda, and more recently, there's been a lot more training that's enabled us as a workforce to provide better customer service and to build better inclusion into the way we commission, design and deliver future projects. And the slide in front of you shows all of the different ways that training has been available. I think the one for me that's been implemented recently is the disability equality training, and this is a workshop where a small group of staff, and generally they're able-bodied, they go on a journey, and by a journey I mean an actual transport, getting on a train, a tube from station to station, and actually making a physical journey. And they do that with a disabled person on London Underground network. This training has really helped staff, I think, to understand the challenges that a person may face when using our transport system. And for me, this has been really powerful. We all deliver projects and programs, and you can try and take out as much unconscious bias out of your thought process as possible. But I don't think always an able-bodied person can fully understand potentially the challenges a person faces when they're in a wheelchair. I remember someone saying from a course that just the levels of the signs for someone in a wheelchair can be an issue. And I think for us as project managers, designers, delivering those signs or any part of a project, it's not necessarily something that we would think about. So for me, it's putting ourselves in the customer's perspective. It's really important.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Chrisma. I think for all of us, we often take our lead from our clients. So it's been great to hear why this is important from you and your perspective. So with that, I think I'll hand back to Helen. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Rand and Chrisma. And I'm going to go straight into the questions. So we've got time for a couple of questions, I think. And a really important questions come up around how we engage individuals who might not be convinced to the business case around whether it be women in STEM, disability that we've just been talking about, or other aspects of inclusion. And so how do you engage teams? How do you engage across the workforce of people who may think it's just political correctness gone mad, for example, if you've ever heard that phrase, or just get a bit frustrated or feel threatened by it even, or that it's a waste of time and they need to get on with their work? So I'm really interested in examples from your experience for the other speakers. If you want to, if we start with Tiffany, have you got any one example maybe?
I think just it's really important for sessions like this and that people talk about it. I think often that if people are not in a minority group, they're not aware of actually all the experiences that people in the workforce are encountering. So I think that things like this actually play a big role to educate people.
Yeah, no, I agree. What about Tracey? Anything from Kier? Yeah. Any other points?
I think it's around conversation. Certainly our journey around disability, it was just putting it on the agenda. We also, we got a board game called Equally Yours, which has been a fantastic tool. We take it out to our sort of front line, and it's a fantastic tool for starting conversations in a I do find if you go in and say, right, we're going to do ED&I training today, look around the room and the raised eyebrows are, evidence. So we tried to look at how we start conversations in a real different way. And we got this board game, and on it, it's sort of a bit of fun, but it's around scenarios. So rather than say, about people or groups, it's just around scenarios. And what we do is just start discussions about how would you deal with this scenario? So, and would you feel it's appropriate? And we really just start discussions with it. And we've found that that's really helpful. So sometimes just making it about not, and I don't want to downgrade it, but rather than saying this is about ED&I, just saying this is about how we all care, all relate to each other and deal with each other and, just having sensible conversations and not always labelling it as ED&I. This is about making sure that everyone can be themselves.
I've heard that before, Tracey, just using ordinary language. I know in the construction industry they talk about fairness and respect because those words maybe resonate with more people than talking about equality and diversity. And you mentioned a board game. One of our members, Babcock, who was up for a WISE Award a couple of years ago, they used theatre. So they got a theatre group in and they shared stories from their women's network, actually. So they were real experiences, real scenarios, but they anonymised them and played them back as a drama that was shown on the docks down in Devonport. So it's a pretty male-dominated environment. But that drama was very powerful in just raising awareness, really, and expressing that in an anonymous way that didn't threaten the individuals concerned, what it actually felt like when these things have been said to them, and that they built a campaign called No Bystanders on the back of that theatre. So it's another way of just raising people's awareness.
Definitely.
Chrisma, have you got any other idea, suggestions, practical things that you've done in Transport for London to get people to see what the issues are and not be negative around these issues?
I think for me, it's been really useful having the representation across the whole organisation, and especially at a senior level. I know one person shouldn't really make that much of a difference, but I think one person at a very senior level can make quite a change. And I think what was just said earlier in terms of just having the discussions, I think is really useful. We've been running podcasts in our local team, and just hearing our engineers who are female, just them displaying things that have happened to them that may just be normal from a male perspective, just letting people know how that's made them feel, I think has been really useful.
Yeah. It's about winning hearts as well as minds, isn't it? Some of the statistics we've shared in the slides and the research on improved financial performance and productivity, etc., are about winning minds, maybe around the business case, but it's also about feelings, isn't it? Which helps people engage emotionally. And in our experience at WISE, certainly that both of those are equally important in order to make change, because you need people to feel it as well as get it intellectually. And some people respond more for the feeling side and some more the research evidence data side. So both are important, I think, as a strategy to move forward. If we move on, and another question we had, which is linked actually, I think, is about intersectionality. And it was question specifically to WISE, but I'll ask the rest of you as well. If I start with answering for WISE, the question was about how much focus WISE puts into intersectionality when it comes to gender. And it is absolutely essential, because there's a stereotype not just about women in engineering, but about science and engineering and construction, science and engineering particularly, as it being a bit of an elite subject, and there's only certain people who went to certain schools or universities who do well. And so it's really important that when we look for role models or speakers at events, that we're as inclusive as possible, and we're very proactive about doing that with our One of a Million campaign, for example. That's the most recent campaign on the My Skills, My Life profile. And then as well as that is about working. We work alongside networks like Inter-Engineering, which promotes the positive role models of people from LGBTQ backgrounds in engineering, and with the Association of Black Engineers and other groups like that, just to give them opportunities to speak at our events and work with them collaboratively, because we're all trying to achieve essentially the same thing, which is about inclusion for me. So it's we focus on gender because there's some particular issues, and women are the biggest underrepresented group, but women themselves come from different backgrounds, and none of us have one single identity. So I think intersectionality is critically important to what WISE does. Any of the others of the presenters want to add to that and comment about the intersectionality question?
Yeah, I would. It's Rand here. Sorry. I'm really pleased Ryan asked this question, actually, because from my perspective, there's often a common ground between social categorizations that sort of are discriminated against, and often for me that comes down to actually just needing that equality of opportunity. And it's about, irrespective of what the categorization is, it's about seeing a visible, transparent route to success, that seeing that opportunities are available, and that often comes with seeing people who have, whatever your categorization is, achieve that, and feeling that it's something therefore that's open to you. One of the things that I think we all need to take a personal commitment to is wherever so for example, Tiffany and I will be responsible for building teams on behalf of Atkins. We will put together a team of people, and it's to challenge the usual makeup of that team, because the strength is the collective. Whilst it's often about putting forward the best CV. That CV might not always give you the full cross-section that you need, but it's when you actually put together a team and market the value of the breadth of the team and the variety that they give, that I think is our responsibility to challenge ourselves in the construction and engineering industry, to offer to our clients maybe not the solution that they'd originally put on the table, but the one that we feel will respond best and give them the widest variety of options. And that comes from having representations from graduates and apprentices to all the different services that are offered across all of our different skills. And that's why it's a really important question for me.
I agree with that. It's quite a good, we're actually out of time, but that's a good note to end on. I think we've had some very rich content here from the different presenters, both on the evidence for a business case, practical actions on how you can make progress towards inclusion, and the importance of inclusion, taking that subject in the round. So I would like to thank our speakers for the time they put into the presentations. Thank you all for attending, and thank the Institution of Structural Engineers for organising such a topical event today, and look forward to the future events in this series.